tailored solutions for your most complex challenges, comprehensive results that help communities, economies, and natural places thrive. We're the team whose engineering and environmental expertise delivers these outcomes. Around the globe, our engineers, scientists, and technical specialists focus on solving our clients' problems as if they were our own. With Barr's resourcefulness and dedication, you'll find solutions in engineering and design, environmental investigation and remediation, permitting and compliance, sustainability and resiliency, and water management. All our work begins with listening, because your problem deserves a tailored solution from consultants who share your passion and integrity. Because your evolving needs require an agile partner who can dive in and assist at any point along the way. We're here at every step to deliver an exceptional experience, sustainable solutions, peace of mind. Together with Barr, you'll find the best answers to your biggest challenges.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Jim Aiken. I'm your moderator today. And just wanted to mention a few things before we get going here. Just an introduction. I'm kind of the MC for this show. If you have any background in landfill and groundwater and related to PFAS, you know that there's other studies out there, and people ask, why are you excited about this talk and this report? And I'd say really for two reasons. This report has a lot of data. And if you're a data hound like me, it's really interesting to see all the relationships that are, but it really comes down to one major factor, and that is that the context of the data is really important. And the one thing that I hope you're going to really take away from this today is that there's a lot of interesting relationships that are drawn out in this study that are not always put forward in many other reports. So, for example, the context of the up versus down gradient groundwater situation, monitoring networks, the number of parameters relating the PFAS to not just the up versus down, but also the traditional detection monitoring parameters, land use, as well as the type of landfill. All of those things together provide insight and help us understand the data a lot better. So as we go forward today, first of all, welcome everybody. Just a few logistics. If you're having trouble with your Teams connection and can't see me or can't hear me, please email our administrative superstar support person, Lisa Unger. That's LUNGAR@barr.com. And Lisa will help you get you going online. For technical content, please send questions via the Q&A icon near the top of your team screen. The chat has been disabled for this particular conference. You can also ask questions and follow up directly with myself or Jim Item, who's our presenter today. There'll be some email contact information at the end. And then finally, a link to this recording and the report will be sent out near the end of the week or shortly thereafter. By way of introduction, my name is Jim Aiken. I am a senior hydrogeologist and vice president based in the Minneapolis office. I have about 3 decades of experience working in landfill monitoring and groundwater, as well as permitting environmental review. And so that's one of the reasons why this particular talk is of great interest to me, and has been. This is a culmination of about 5 years of discussions about how to better understand the relationship of PFAS and groundwater. In the last 10 years, I've been really working a lot on investigation remediation of PFAS directly around landfills and related to landfills and leachate. Joining me today is our presenter and kind of the star of the show, Jim Item. Jim is a senior hydrogeologist and vice president in Barr's Minneapolis office as well. He's a principal investigator leading this study. Jim has nearly 30 years of consulting experience. A little more than half of that of his career has been working with Barr on solid waste, industrial, and public service clients and helping them tackle complex challenges. In addition, Jim has a wide background in the classics of Superfund, CERCLA, RECRA, and brownfields, where he's honed his technique to really makes him the perfect person to lead this study with all his abilities and skills learned from those decades of investigation and remediation. So the agenda today, we're going to start out with just kind of going through a little background information, the study origin, its goals, the study design, how it was configured. I think there's some nuances there that are really important, as well as getting into the results, of course. And then finally, we'll finish with some summary conclusions and a Q&A, where Jim and I will answer questions from you, the audience, using that, again, the Q&A function near the top of the screen there. And if you have not received a copy of the report, there will probably a link will be issued shortly and will help you. Before we get into it, I just want to make sure we acknowledge our client for this, the Minnesota Landfill Coalition, which is a group of public-private utility-owned landfills in the state of Minnesota. And these are the stakeholders and experts in the management of solid waste that provide such a valuable service to our communities and our economy, and engage in a wide variety of other functions as well as landfills, of course, recycling, reuse, and education programs throughout the state, materials recovery as well. In the Landfill Coalition, the PFAS group consists of 48 coalition members who commissioned this third-party PFAS study. We're very grateful to them for choosing Barr to lead this, but we would be remiss if we didn't also thank the many consultants in the state that work for the coalition members that cooperated with this study and helped us provide this information in an efficient manner so that we can present it to you. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
All right. Thank you, Jim, and welcome everybody. I hope the sound is working out okay. As most of you know, the term PFAS encompasses a broad group of manufactured chemicals that number in the thousands. Many of these chemicals, such as PFOA and PFOS, shown here, are stable due to their chemistry. There you go. It's this stability that in part has led to PFAS being detected in a wide variety of environmental media. And due to several other properties, PFAS are included in many different everyday products. It's the intersection of PFAS and landfills, or the intersection of PFAS and landfills, of course, come with the disposal of these PFAS-containing products. Minnesota has long been a leader in protecting the environment, and the state has taken a multi-agency approach to PFAS with efforts led by the MPCA, the Minnesota Department of Health, and the legislature. Examples of this include the recently enacted Amara's Law, which implemented PFAS reporting requirements and the phase out of PFAS in certain consumer products, which will reduce the PFAS contributions to landfills in the future. For the PFAS currently at hand, MPCA came out with the Minnesota PFAS blueprint and monitoring plans. And these plans have focused on better understanding PFAS in the environment. So with these documents and these recent efforts, the narrative on PFAS in some ways have shifted from site by site to more of a societal cycle. And landfills play a central role in that cycle through the acceptance of disposed waste. Many landfill studies have involved PFAS concentrations in leachate, which is appropriate given the interconnectedness of leachate management generated at landfills that goes throughout the wastewater treatment plants, various treatment before it's discharged to the environment. From an investigation standpoint, the investigation of leachate makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's a lot of certainty in your source term, where your leachate's coming from, what type of waste, how old it is. And it really facilitates kind of an in-depth evaluation of PFAS, evaluation of leachate in a controlled manner. Conversely, groundwater studies are a little less abundant, certainly in the literature. And they really come in two different broad categories. The first being very site-specific investigation that really comes up with a detailed investigation of a site and detailed findings, but those findings don't really, facilitate an understanding to a broad community beyond the bounds of that site. For many reasons, it's really difficult to conduct a broad groundwater study with PFAS at landfills. There's a lot of nuance that goes into it, but the other types of groundwater studies that have been published in the literature include these kind of compilations or accumulations of a lot of data from a lot of different sites and a broad evaluation of the data set as a whole, looking at occurrence rates or concentration ranges. So the idea of this study came from the Minnesota Landfill Coalition. And they're recognizing that the coalition is uniquely positioned to design and undertake a broad groundwater study to further understand PFAS in groundwater at landfills in the state. The reason why they're uniquely positioned is because, as Jim said in the introduction, the coalition's made up of experts in operations and hydrogeology and PFAS. They have decades of groundwater experience for each of their sites. The coalition's also positioned favorably for industry collaboration. They're a group of owners and operators. That's who they are. And they found that there's broad interest within the coalition to form a PFAS group to conduct a study like this. And that willingness came along with the commitment to pool of resources to fund the study for data collection, providing site-specific information, which we'll get into, and to develop a report across the data set, across a number of different types of facilities. But really, the goals as written in the report were to obtain reliable data at a broad group of landfills in a consistent and transparent manner, and advancing the understanding of the relationship between landfills and the occurrence of PFAS in groundwater in Minnesota. But really, in more plain speak, the goal included developing a data set that would help better understand and address PFAS issues that are affecting the solid waste industry. So, as the study report gets into, and what I will be discussing are some of these issues. And those include upgrading PFAS concentrations in groundwater, and we categorize that data to look at different land uses shown here. We also look at downgradient PFAS concentrations, and we categorize that to landfill characteristics, including waste type and liner status. And then finally, we'll finish with a comparison of PFAS data and traditional monitoring data. And some of the relationships have somewhat of an implication, or at least a lead into considering future groundwater monitoring program changes. So we'll start off with the study design. This slide is an overview, or it provides a general overview of the study. And there are four main steps. The preparation included developing a common and flexible framework for the participating facilities to participate in the study. Step two included the collection of 2 rounds of sampling for PFAS of groundwater and the analysis of those samples study-wide with one common or shared laboratory. Step 3 included a data review that was centralized with the Barr data quality specialist to kind of give a consistent look under a project SAP at all the data for consistency. And then preparing a comprehensive report over the entire data set, which was blinded. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Regarding the planning and the collection of data, there's a few things I wanted to kind of highlight a little bit. You know, a study with 48 landfills, owners, operators, consultants, and samplers, it's kind of a large undertaking. Some of the keys to the study and kind of foundational setup of the study included the preparation, which we held a number of pre-sampling webinars with the owners and operators, consultants, and samplers to kind of go over the objectives of the study, to review sampling guidance, and really give that boots on the ground coordination with the samplers. The groundwater sampling itself included the collection of groundwater samples at each of the 48 facilities by their sampling crew who had previous experience and knowledge of the site conditions, and they utilized their site-specific sampling methods, of course modified to conform with the PFAS sampling guidance, excuse me. The analysis of the study samples was conducted with US EPA method 537.1, which was then current at the time. That method includes measuring concentrations for 33 PFAS, and all the data study-wide was reported out with consistent reporting limits, of course subject to the typical nuance of analyzing environmental samples. Pace Minneapolis, a local laboratory, conducted all of the analyses, and their analyses and method, which was certified for groundwater, adhered to the PFAS analytical guidance issued by the MPCA. And finally, I talked about the data review, the data quality review. It's done at Barr. But after that was done, after all the data was reviewed and qualified, the data was sent out to each participating facility for their review and their confirmation, just to verify that everything looked in order. Another important aspect of the study design included informing the study with site-specific knowledge. That's a pretty significant undertaking with this large of a group, but we accomplished it through the completion of online surveys that were sent to each participating facility. And these surveys included gathering information on facility contacts, general information about each facility, such as size, age, overall cover, and liner details. We sent out a survey specifically for the PFAS monitoring network wells. This facility included well construction, hydraulic positioning relative to the landfill, what type of waste was up gradient. And then we sent out online surveys for each groundwater sampling event, PFAS sampling event. And those involved were the data collected per the site-specific sampling analysis plan. What were the monitoring parameters? Did you collect other samples? What for, and were they detected? So on and so forth. So really, this was our mechanism to kind of gain that institutional knowledge from each of the sites by people who know the details, and they provided it to us to inform the study. In addition to the online surveys, we also included the request for non-PFAS groundwater data from each of the facilities. We asked that data was collected during the same monitoring events as the PFAS samples included in the study were from. And really, we didn't ask for additional data. This was just their routine monitoring parameter data that we got. So from the informational survey responses, we were able to start categorizing the data. This all leads into the design, and the first categorization included hydraulic position of the monitoring wells. Each monitoring well in the study was categorized into one of these four: up gradient, down gradient, side gradient, or unknown. And, once we get into the data, I'm going to show you some overall statistics. I'm going to do the range of concentrations and the frequency of detections. Data from all four of these categories are included in those. However, in certain data evaluation exercises, we've eliminated some of the wells from consideration out of conservatism. One example is for up gradient groundwater data quality evaluations. We removed the up gradient samples from wells that had leachate spray fields located up gradient the facility. That way, we wanted to get rid of any extra influences and really kind of constrain the data sets so it's a scientific look at the conditions. More details on that are provided in the report. There's too many for me to go into during the talk, but you'll see it there if you're interested. So after we identified an up gradient groundwater data set, the up gradient data were further characterized based on the type of primary land use upgrading of the landfills. That was the information that was one of the pieces of information that was provided in the informational surveys up front in the study. In total, the study included 83 upgradient monitoring wells and a total of 160 groundwater samples collected. The sample categories included agricultural, industrial solid waste, residential undeveloped, and then we had no responses. By the numbers, the upgradient wells at the facilities included in the study, agricultural upgradient land use was the most common, and it was ranged. The sample counts with agricultural upgradient use were 94 total, and the other three categories we had 23 samples in each category. Now, as we get into the results, I'll show you plots with a lot of different data. But I think what it's important to note is that, in many cases, and actually all the cases, I feel, we have sufficient data to make these general observations and kind of really start to understand better PFAS at groundwater at landfills. I'll get off the soapbox and we'll move into downgradient data setup. The downgradient groundwater data in the study were categorized by characteristics of the landfill that were located upgrading of each monitoring well. And in the report in the slideshow, we talk about upgradient waste type and liner status. And here are the four categories that we used. Legacy closed, unlined waste is that pre-subtitle D waste that was mixed municipal solid waste and other waste that were combined and eventually covered. These are the facilities that are covered that predates the promulgation of RCRA Subtitle D. The other unlined category is unlined construction and demolition debris facilities. And then we had two lined facilities types: lined municipal solid waste and lined construction demolition waste, or referred to as lined C&D. Now, different from upgradient monitoring wells, downgradient monitoring wells at these landfills are often positioned downgrading of multiple landfill cell types that vary in both waste types and liner statuses. And we used a hierarchical approach to assign the wells to these 4 categories. How that really manifested in the report is kind of tried to show on this slide. We understood the groundwater flow from the surveys. So if a well was down gradient of an individual cell, just one type of waste and liner status, the data from that well was assigned to that type of landfill. If well was down gradient of multiple types, let's go line C and D, unlined C and D right here, we made the decision to categorize the data from that well and attribute it to the unlined C and D out of conservatism. This is, so on and so forth. The farthest waste type and cell type a well was located, that's where it was assigned. The sample the categorical sample counts ranged from these 4 groups from greater than 100 in the unlined C and D and unlined legacy materials or cells, these 2 cells, to 38 lined MSW samples and 61 samples downgrading of line C and D. So we'll get into the study results. Here's a summary of the overall participation numbers and a map showing the general distribution of the facility. As you'll see in the report, the study was conducted with blinded facilities, monitoring wells, and sample IDs. But we've shown the location by county here. So we had 48 participating landfills, 282 monitoring wells included in the study, and 555 groundwater samples collected from those monitoring wells. This plot shows the PFAS detection frequency across all of the samples collected in the study. As you recall, there were 33 PFAS analyzed by the method that was used. 8 of the PFAS were detected in 25% or greater of the groundwater samples. Shown here, the blue PFAS across the bottom represent the 6 regulated PFAS. As you can see, the regulated PFAS and their frequency, the state of Minnesota is pretty much on top of which PFAS are important in groundwater right now. And they're, as a result of prior sampling on their own, they're looking into the 2 light blue PFAS as well for the future. So the study findings really focused on these 6 regulated PFAS and compared these concentrations to health risk limits. Across the board, we had PFBA, PFHX, PFBS, PFOA, PFHXS, and PFOS. That's the first and last time I'm going to do the acronyms altogether. But I pointed out there's 6 regulated PFAS. We're looking at them all. And the plots that we're going to be showing you, I'm going to show you, have a lot of data on them. So I want to give you a sense on how to read them. So we're going to move through this a little bit quick and hit the high points in the seminar or the webinar here, but you can follow up in the report if you're interested. So this is a plot from the report that shows PFAS concentrations in upgrading groundwater. And as I mentioned before, the data or the by well are assigned to upgradient land use for in terms of agriculture, categories of agriculture, industrial solid waste, residential and undeveloped, and no response. So getting into the graphical language, I'm going to show you a zoom in, but I want to show you, so the 6 regulated PFAS each have their own tile from PFBA, PFBS, PFOS to PFOA. And each one of these tiles includes the categorized data from the study. Again, this is upgradient data now, but it's the same for a lot of the downgradient data. So the categories of agriculture, industrial solid waste, residential undeveloped, and no response are shown in columns. The concentrations are on a logarithmic scale, which matters. This is 1 nanogram per liter, 10 nanograms per liter, and 100 nanograms per liter. The data points are shown in circles with concentrations, and non-detections are shown with triangles. And the non-detected values were assigned to 1/2 the method detection limit. And then box and whiskers plots are shown for the categories that had more than 50% of the detections, with the median shown in the dark line, the interquartile range here, and the whiskers showing the potential outliers. And finally, health risk limit, the state promulgated criteria, is shown in purple for each. So now that we're kind of on board with that, I'm going to get into the results. So again, plot of PFAS concentrations in upgrading groundwater. 1 or more PFAS were detected at 75% of the 45 landfills with upgradient groundwater data. And so 75% of the 45 landfills, 1 or more PFAS were also detected on a sample basis in 64% of the upgradient samples. Oops. Well, apparently my slide is going a little tough, so you're gonna have to follow the bouncing ball. So PFOA, which is plotted down here, was detected in 25% of the upgradient samples and was the only PFAS that exceeded the HRL. You see right up here. That was exceeded in 5 wells. PFOA was not detected in upgrading groundwater with upgrading residential and undeveloped land use. And that's kind of a constant theme in a lot of these categories, fewer detections at least. Now, again, this is a combination of residential and undeveloped, so it's a little bit of a lump. PFAS were more prevalent in upgrading groundwater when upgrading land use was either industrial / solid waste or agriculture. And you can see that by increased number of detections in these categories here. Some other tidbits in the report. PFBA was the most frequently detected in upgradient groundwater. It was greater than 50% in 3 of the land use categories. HXA and HXS are approaching the HRL, but don't exceed it in the samples, including the study. And all 6 regulated PFAS were detected in 10% of the upgradient samples, or upgradient monitoring wells included in the study. One other thing I'd like to point out with the upgradient groundwater plots, we included the ranges. I mentioned there are some facilities with leachate spray fields upgradient, and we excluded that data from the plots. But to give some kind of general comparison, as shown in the report and discussed in the report, the concentration for those facilities are shown as a range on the sidebar. Really, it was a small data set. 3 facilities had upgradient spray fields. And, we don't generally draw conclusions from a small data set, but it is pretty obvious that the upgrading groundwater concentrations in these upgrading wells kind of falls in line with the rest of the upgrading data set. So, switching gears to discuss PFAS concentrations in downgradient groundwater now. This is a plot showing the PFAS concentration ranges for each of the 6 regulated PFAS. 1 or more PFAS were detected in 89% of the downgradient samples, and 4 PFAS were detected in greater than 50% of the samples, PFBA through PFBS. And the median range, median concentration with these ranges are shown here. Generally on the order of, they range from 17 to 3 nanograms per liter. And on the high end of the scale, the highest PFAS concentrations detected around 1,100 nanograms per liter here. This plot shows downgrading PFAS concentrations categorized by waste type and liner status. Similar to what I mentioned before. So the red in the first columns are PFAS concentrations from legacy closed online waste. Those are the pre-Subtitle D landfills. Green is the data from lined MSW landfills, including a couple industrial and ash facilities that were lined. Yellow are data from the unlined C&D landfills, and purple are from the lined C&D landfills. So, 5 PFAS were detected in one or more samples at concentrations above a hurl, noting that PFOS was detected in exactly one. These data, the downgradient data, don't account for upgradient PFAS contributions, but I think the data set is still pretty telling. The median PFAS concentrations for groups with 50% detections are generally pretty comparable across categories. You'll see here and here. Really, we didn't see a lot of differences in concentrations between different waste types, median concentrations, that is. What the data really show, though, I think the biggest takeaway talked about in the report is the exceedances, the hurl exceedances, are occurring in this red and yellow columns. So there is no hurl exceedances in groundwater down gradient of lined MSW landfills and lined C&D landfills in the study. In regards to the unlined facilities, you'll see the preponderance of data is actually below the hurls. There are some, you'll see here, but there's more below the hurls than not. That was a little bit surprising to me, but I think these two things are key aspects in kind of informing the solid waste, the understanding of PFAS in groundwater at solid waste facilities. There's been a lot of press about landfills being sources, and in some cases they are. In other cases, they're sources, but liners appear to be effectively managing or protecting groundwater to hurls. So using the same data set, overall, 20% of the downgradient groundwater samples collected in the study had one or more PFAS above a hurl. It's kind of the broad range. But if we look and break it down by percentage of liner status and waste types, or just liner status even, like I said, none of the 99 samples collected downgraded lined waste had PFAS above a hurl. And about a quarter, or 27% of the 215 samples collected downgraded unlined waste had one or more PFAS exceedances. If we look at, instead of by sample counts, if we look at it by well counts, overall 22% of the wells had a PFAS exceedance. Again, 0 wells downgrading of lined waste, shown in blue, had a PFAS exceedance. And about 32% of the wells included at these unlined facilities had one or more exceedance, with 74% having no hurl exceedances. The plot on the right, I kind of mentioned we kind of looked at different waste types and trying to look at PFAS, and not a lot came out of that. But the plot on the right shows hurl exceedances by waste type. And again, and we included liner status. So of the unlined closed legacy waste, By well count, 29% of the wells had exceedances, 71 didn't. So really the numbers between unlined legacy waste and unlined C&D are pretty similar. Based on the numbers, I don't think we can make too much difference out of that. So really it comes down to liner status, lined or unlined, to kind of, be informed a little bit more about PFAS concentrations downgrading of our landfills. The report also includes kind of statistics on PFAS exceedances by facility counts. It's kind of sliced and diced a number of ways. Just like the data I showed you, overall, 0 of the 13 lined landfills had exceedances, and about half of the legacy closed unlined waste and unlined C&Ds had 1 or more wells with the PFAS exceedance. The main takeaways are that, again, liner status seems to matter more than waste type. But not all landfills have these exceedances. Finally, the report examines correlation between PFAS and non-PFAS routine monitoring data. We did an evaluation to look for correlations between routine monitoring parameter data and PFAS data, and we didn't find any strong correlations. That's published in the report. But a little more telling is we used the informational survey responses in conjunction with the non-PFAS data to kind of examine the effectiveness of monitoring parameters identifying potential releases. And the way we did that was we asked in those surveys of the facilities that collected non-PFAS data, did they have exceedances of those data over hurls, health-based values? These are the non-promulgated groundwater screening criteria. Risk assessment advice, MCLs, or intervention limits. And the takeaway was each of the wells that had a PFAS exceedance had other parameters exceeded. Here's the list. And in fact, so this is the count of wells that had 1 or more PFAS detected above a hurl, as determined by a corrected PFAS sum of ratios, which is explained in the report. So like I said, each one had non-PFAS parameter data above a non-promulgated screening criteria. And there's a lot of other samples that didn't have PFAS above a hurl that also had these parameters above non-promulgated criteria. Overall, 85% of the samples with PFAS hurl exceedances reported non-PFAS data. So we have a decent data set where we can start looking at this. And I think this is, the data suggests that traditional monitoring parameters are effective at screening for identifying potential landfill releases. Just by use of this traditional data and the non-promulgated screening criteria. Of course, each facility is unique, but the inclusion of PFAS in routine monitoring programs, in some cases, doesn't seem to lead to big gains or improve release detection capabilities. Perhaps I'd offer up that the use of PFAS in monitoring may be more appropriate for initial assessment monitoring following a potential release and or baseline monitoring. So wrapping up here to get the Q&A. Summary and conclusions for upgradient results. Regulated PFAS were detected in 76% of the landfills that submitted upgradient data. PFAS are most prevalent in upgrading groundwater with areas of upgrading agricultural and industrial solid waste land use. And PFOA was the only PFAS detected above a hurl up gradient of the facilities. As far as down gradient, landfill bottom liners effectively protect PFAS from groundwater impacts. As I pointed out, in a few different ways, the lined facilities, both are associated with fewer detections and lower concentrations of PFAS in groundwater down gradient, regardless of waste type. The unlined landfills showed a little more variable results, but as I noted, most of the data were below the hurls. About half of the unlined facilities had one or more samples with the PFAS hurl exceedance. That's on a facility basis, about half of the landfills then. On a groundwater sample basis, about a quarter of the down gradient samples had a PFAS hurl exceedance. So we're really looking into, not all landfills, just because the landfill's there doesn't mean that you're going to find hurl exceedances. Finally, PFAS concentrations in down gradient groundwater correspond more with liner status than waste type. And then we just went over the monitoring considerations. The traditional routine monitoring parameter data seem to be effective screening tools when utilized with non-promulgated screening criteria issued by the state of Minnesota. And as we're developing our monitoring networks and incorporating PFAS moving forward, I think this is something to look at on a case-by-case basis on really the utility of using or including PFAS in our monitoring programs. It may not always improve release detection capabilities. All right, thank you. So, Jim, I'll invite you back on screen for the Q&A session.
Thanks, Jim. That was a lot of information. Thank you for going through that. It was a great summary of the report, and I just want to emphasize to folks that there's a lot of data that was just thrown at you, and it's kind of hard to digest it all. We're just trying to try to tease out some of the highlights to it, and I think Jim did a good job of bringing some of those out. I think one of the first emailed questions I got, I didn't see anything in the chat in the Q&A, but I do encourage you while we're talking to go ahead and post your questions in the Q&A function. It's kind of located in the middle right of your Teams ribbon up near the top. One of the questions came in, Jim. I was hoping that you could maybe offer a little on this. It's clear that 50% of the unlined C&D landfills had detections of PFAS. And one of the questions that we heard was, is there any indication of why some of those landfills may have had detections and some might not? Is there anything in our study that would give us any insight into that, either through the parameters or either the PFAS parameters or the other detection monitoring parameters that we saw?
The study doesn't really get that granular, and the short answer is no. We don't have information specific to any one landfill on why or why not. I mean, based on kind of the evaluation in the literature, I think really the hurl exceedances downgrading of the various unlined facilities are all about site specifics. The hydrogeology, the source term, what kind of waste is contained, how old is it? All wastes aren't equal either. So, demo C&D specifically can vary, depending on the incoming waste too.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. I've in the demos I've seen, there's pretty wide variety in how they're operated, not just in terms of the types of waste they will or will not accept, but I've also noticed that there's a wide variety in how they manage their daily cover, for instance, and preventing precip from reaching those wastes. And that might be a factor, or perhaps that's a factor as well. I'm not sure if you agree or not.
Yeah, certainly operations make a difference.
All right. Again, encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A if you have any. The question is, were the monitoring wells distinguished between up gradient and down gradient? And I think we did have that information, and the questioner says they may have missed it, but I know you talked about the differences between up gradient and some of the other things. One of the other questions that's related to this one, I'm hoping you can answer at the same time, is what are some potential up gradient sources? You mentioned biosolids for agricultural sites, but are there other potential up gradient sources that one might want to be aware of? Should they be looking at some of these data, these landfills or others?
Well, yeah, again, we get back to the site specifics. I think there's plenty of literature on the kind of the ambient background that's related from aerial deposition. So that's kind of the background everywhere to varying extents. But, in each one of those categories, agricultural, industrial, other solid waste facilities, even residential, there's a variety of literature on the sources there. Undeveloped residential had the least amount of detections. That may have been because there's an inordinate amount of undeveloped in that category, but septic systems are a big one for residential.
Sure.
Industrial and solid, industrial settings have a variety of, potential discharges that could affect it. And agriculture with a variety of, not necessarily chemicals even, but maybe containers and impurities that come across. But I think the biggest thing, what we don't capture in this is kind of the nuance of site specifics. How big are the roads in the area? What are the other influences? So I think the bottom line is it's important on a site-by-site basis to kind of characterize up gradients pretty thoroughly.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say some of the more.
Hey, Jim, I'll add to that too.
Go ahead.
The data set, there were some facilities with quite significant. I showed the PFAS, the PFOA above hurls at a few of the facilities, the data, but there's historical inputs at some of these facilities too that they're noted of concern, feel they're affecting other aspects of their water quality. So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. Just real quick, I do have another Q&A question that came in. There was another email question. What are some of the significant differences in the parameters of PFAS that you discovered in this study? Specifically, for example, between the different types of PFAS, PFOA versus PFOS, et cetera, et cetera. Was there a trend for various landfills that you saw in those?
No, we started down that path. We were trying to find if there was like a signature, a PFAS signature for waste types. And it really, that was early in the data evaluation, and it really didn't amount to much. So we kind of moved on from that and didn't find anything conclusive there.
One of the Q&A questions is, how does this study differ from the previous studies on solid waste performed by MPCA? And I think this is in reference to, for example, the study that Barr was involved with, but perhaps also the earlier study that looked at different types of waste types. Are you familiar with those studies, Jim? Can you comment on that?
Yeah. No, I studied. Yeah, the PCA has done a lot of work in PFAS and in groundwater facilities over recent years. I think one of the big differences of the most recent PCA study was that they sampled a lot of wells. They focused on unlined landfills, which is understandable given the monitoring plan, to get your arms around, PFAS and groundwater. I think this study included that, but we also included other different waste and liner types that we spent a lot of effort trying to get right, categorizing and everything else. So I think the results of the closed online programs kind of fall in line with the PCAs, but I think we go beyond by kind of showing some other data for these line facilities. So it gives, I hope, a feel. And I think the other thing is, really one of the objectives of our study was to collect this data across these multitude of facilities and provide the data in graphical formats. So each of the owners and operators can kind of see where they fall out pretty easily relative to their other counterparts in the industry.
Thanks. Yeah, another question came in. What type of sampling equipment was that in our? I'm not sure if that was in the survey questions, but what type of equipment was generally used in the study, or was it just about everything from balers to bladder pumps and everything in between?
Yeah, there's a wide variety, and that's one of the aspects. I mean, we asked a lot of questions in those informational surveys, and we spent a lot of time on the sampling equipment, the well materials, and everything else. We have that data, but it was kind of a forest through the trees thing. I mean, that's something that we can look into specifically. Did a very cursory look to try to look at PFAS, evidence of cross-contamination or anything, but we kind of got under the hood of the questions, but it didn't come into the report. So, okay. But I guess simply to answer, it was a multitude. It was mostly pumps, submersibles, and dedicated pumps, but there's some balers too.
All right. One of the questions kind of hits on something that I really was interested in, and it's in regard to using firefighting foams to suppress landfill fires. I was surprised, quite frankly, that there wasn't more of a fingerprint for PFOS, which is generally, in my experience anyway, the foams that cleanups that I've done, more closely related to firefighting foam than PFOA. Although they're both present, we certainly see a lot more PFOS in firefighting foam than PFOA. And the comment is that the historical use of those foams might explain some of these concentrations in there. I'm just wondering if you had any opinions on that.
Well, we asked that in the survey as well, and we didn't really get a substantial amount of responses other than unknown. So we really couldn't put much around that study question. So I guess I don't really have anything to add on that narrative.
All right. Another question came in, one that we discussed briefly, and that is why the study chose to use hurls, state promulgated hurls, versus, say, HBVs and other values. And I know others have asked about MCLs as well as it relates to PFAS.
Yeah, well, we looked at all the criteria. Hurls are the promulgated criteria that the landfills are adhering to. And there's been a lot of changes. And I know HBVs, the report goes into this a little bit more, that these values are lower. I think some of the issue, one, we have a hard enough time getting messaging across with the simple criteria. If we start looking at like HBVs, some of which are lower than background or analytical capabilities, you really start kind of losing focus on the broader aspects of the data set. But I think the short answer is because they're the promulgated criteria. I know we had an email question about MCLs as well. We're dealing with groundwater, not drinking water, so we didn't really want to approach that either. So again, getting back to the data presentation, I think I'm hopeful that the plots kind of lay that out so people can consider whatever criteria they're looking at, whether it be HBDs or RAs.
Yep. Choose your own criteria, right?
Choose your adventure. Yeah.
Yeah, choose your own adventure. Yeah. No, I would also say that, when we started this in 2022, we had to come up with a study design and a work plan. And, any study that you start is going to be a snapshot in time, and you kind of do have to stick to your study criteria and your plan. And we should expect that as time goes on, there's going to be changing criteria all along the way. And so that really does get back to your point where the data is what's important. Choose your own user-defined limits to suit your purposes. With that, I don't know if there's any other comments coming in the Q&A. We're about at time. So I think if you want to ask any additional questions, please do feel free to contact either Jim or myself. Our emails are shown on the screen, should be on the screen. I don't know if you can see those. I guess if there's any other comments, please let us know. And otherwise, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your interest in this topic, and hopefully we can use this data, this study, to build on and further our understanding of PFAS and landfills in groundwater in the state of Minnesota as well as elsewhere. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.